Rich family paid mountain man to dispose of their fat daughter. He built her a palace. Make her disappear. I don't care how. The command sliced through the marble parlor of the Vandermeer mansion like a blade. Ezekiel Zeke Stormridge stood silent before the grand fireplace, his broad frame casting a shadow across the golden floor. He was a man of the frontier, a mountain hunter turned scout, roughened by storms and solitude. The glittering chandeliers above him belonged to a world he despised, perfumed, polished, and poisoned by hypocrisy. Across from him, Reginald Vandermeer, one of San Francisco's most powerful merchants, poured himself brandy with a steady hand. "You'll be paid $1,000, he said. "The girl is a complication. She's to be removed discreetly. No questions, no trace." Zeke's eyes narrowed. "And what kind of crime am I to erase?" Vandermeer smiled coldly. "No crime, just shame. My daughter has become an embarrassment to this family. She refuses to marry. No man of standing will have her, not with her size." For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the gilded clock. Then Zeke spoke, voice low and dangerous. "You're paying me to kill your own blood." Vandermeer waved a jeweled hand. "Don't be dramatic. Leave her in the wilderness. She won't last a week. You'll still get your money." Zeke's jaw flexed, but he said nothing. $1,000 could buy land. His own homestead in Oregon, the dream he'd chased for years. He nodded once. "Fine, I'll take her." Later that night, as the mansion slept, Zeke met the girl he'd been hired to dispose of. Genevieve Vandermeer stood trembling by the carriage door, wrapped in lace and fear. Her eyes were wide and pleading, not the eyes of a criminal, but of a prisoner. When she whispered, "Are you here to kill me?" Zeke Stormridge's answer changed both their fates forever. "Not tonight, miss," he said quietly, "and not ever." Genevieve Vandermeer had never known darkness like this. The carriage wheels clattered over the cobblestones, echoing against the silent streets of San Francisco as midnight swallowed the city whole. Beside her sat the man her father had hired, the one with shoulders like stone and eyes that refused to meet hers. His name, he had said, was Ezekiel Stormridge. Zeke. She clutched her gloved hands in her lap, heart hammering beneath the heavy corset her mother had insisted she wear. "You don't have to do this," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Whatever they paid you, I can give you more." Zeke didn't look at her. "I'm not here for your money." "Then why are you here?" she pressed, desperation breaking through the fear. After a moment, his voice came, low and rough. "Because your father told me a lie." Outside, the wind howled through the streets, scattering bits of paper and ash. The city lights faded behind them, and the road turned to dirt. Zeke flicked the reins, driving them north toward the wilderness. He had accepted the job for the money, $1,000 to handle a problem. But the moment he saw her, pale and trembling under the mansion's lamplight, he knew what kind of evil he had been asked to serve. She wasn't wicked or dangerous. She was terrified. Genevieve's face, though round and flushed, carried a softness that the cruel world mistook for weakness. Her eyes were the color of old amber, deep and searching. She wasn't beautiful in the way society demanded, no sharp angles or fragile grace, but there was something luminous in her sadness, something that made Zeke's chest tighten. Hours later, when the city was only a memory, she finally spoke again. "He said you'd kill me, my own father." Zeke's hands tightened around the reins. "He said you were a criminal," he replied. "Someone dangerous, but I've met killers. You're not one of them." She gave a small, broken laugh. "No, I'm just inconvenient." He turned then, meeting her eyes for the first time. "You're not a thing to be disposed of." For the first time that night, she believed him. By dawn, the carriage rolled to a stop at the edge of the mountains. Below them stretched a valley of gold and pine, where the mist still clung to the trees. Zeke climbed down, his boots crunching in the frost, then offered her his hand. "We'll camp here for the night," he said. Jenny hesitated, unsure whether to trust him, but the gentleness in his tone was undeniable. She stepped down, her feet sinking into the damp earth. The world smelled of pine, smoke, and freedom, so unlike the marble halls she'd left behind. Zeke built a fire, his movements efficient, deliberate. When he handed her a tin cup of coffee, she stared at it for a long time before whispering, "You're not like them." He looked up, one eyebrow raised. "Them?" "The people who can look at someone and not see a person." He grunted softly. "I've met plenty like that. They call it refinement. I call it rot." The flames danced between them, their light flickering against the quiet strength in his face. For the first time in her life, Genevieve Vandermeer felt seen, not for what she lacked, but for what she was. And as the first snow began to fall across the valley, she realized the man hired to destroy her might be the only one who would ever save her. The road north wound through the Sierra foothills, turning from gravel to frozen mud, from city trails to wild land where silence ruled. Zeke guided the horses with sure hands, his gaze sweeping the ridges for danger, but his thoughts were elsewhere, on the girl sitting quietly beside him, wrapped in a blanket far too thin for the mountain cold. Genevieve Vandermeer had stopped trembling after the first night, but fear lingered in the tightness of her jaw, the way she avoided his eyes. She had grown up surrounded by marble, crystal, and cruelty. Now she sat in a wagon full of feed sacks and firewood, her silk dress torn at the hem. "Where are you taking me?" she asked at last. "North," Zeke said. "Oregon Territory." Her brow furrowed. "That's days away." "Then it's a good thing we've got days." He didn't tell her that he hadn't yet decided where to go, only that every mile between them and San Francisco felt like a small redemption. When night fell, he built a fire in a clearing beside a frozen stream. The flames reflected off his weathered face as he set a pot of beans over the heat. Genevieve sat across from him, her gloved hands extended toward the warmth. "They really paid you to kill me," she said softly, more statement than question. Zeke's jaw tightened. "They paid me to disappear you. That's not the same." "Isn't it?" she asked bitterly. "Either way, they wanted me gone." He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Then let's make sure you're gone on your own terms." The wind rustled through the pines, scattering ash into the dark. Jenny stared at him, uncertain whether to trust the kindness she heard in his voice. She had known men who spoke gently but meant cruelty. Zeke was different. His words were spare, but when he said something, it felt carved from truth. When she asked, "Why help me?" he shrugged. "Because I know what it is to be unwanted." The admission hung between them. He didn't explain further, and she didn't ask. The next days brought hardship and discovery. They crossed rivers glazed with ice, rode through valleys filled with fog, and slept under skies so vast they made her feel small, but alive. Zeke showed her how to start a fire with flint, how to tell east from west by the stars. She learned quickly, her clumsy city hands toughening with each task. Once, when her foot slipped on a rocky trail, he caught her before she fell, his hand gripping her arm with startling gentleness. "Careful," he murmured. She met his gaze, those blue-gray eyes steady as granite, and for a fleeting second the chill of the mountain air disappeared. At camp that night she found herself watching him work, the precision of his movements, the quiet strength in everything he did. When he noticed her stare, he raised an eyebrow. "Something wrong?" She shook her head, smiling faintly. "Just wondering what kind of man builds fires for girls he's supposed to kill." His mouth twitched. "The kind who's bad at following orders." The days stretched into weeks. As they climbed higher into Oregon's timber country, Jenny's fear slowly gave way to awe. The wilderness was merciless, but it didn't judge. She began to laugh again, soft, unsure laughter that surprised even her. Zeke would look over, pretending not to notice, though the corner of his mouth always lifted just slightly. One evening, while they sat near the fire, she said, "You're going to build that ranch you talked about, aren't you?" He nodded. "A place no one can take from me. A home that's mine." "Could I help?" she asked quietly. "I'm not afraid of work." He studied her, the once pampered daughter of wealth, her dress patched, her hair tangled by the wind, and saw something shining through the ruin. "You could," he said finally, "if that's what you want." She looked into the fire, eyes glistening. "I just want somewhere I belong." Zeke's gaze softened. "Then we'll build that, Miss Vandermeer, together." And somewhere deep inside her, a fragile spark of hope, one her family had spent years trying to crush, began to burn again. The first signs of spring crept over the Oregon range as Zeke and Jenny reached his land. A broad sweep of valley nestled between pine-clad slopes, with a silver stream cutting through the meadow. The air smelled of earth and rain. To Genevieve, it felt like stepping into a dream she'd never dared to have. "This is yours?" she asked, her voice hushed. "Ours, if you want it," Zeke said simply. He tied the horses, then looked out across the land. "We'll need shelter first. The mountains don't care about dreams unless you build them." That night, under a canopy of stars, they set up camp. Zeke marked the ground with stakes for the foundation, and Jenny watched him move with quiet determination. The man who'd once been hired to end her story was now beginning a new one beside her. The work was grueling. Each day began before dawn and ended long after the light had gone. Zeke felled trees, split logs, and hammered nails with the rhythm of someone who'd long ago learned to make peace through labor. Jenny, though unaccustomed to such work, refused to sit idle. She cooked, hauled water, swept sawdust, and even learned to drive nails, though her fingers blistered. "You don't have to prove anything," he told her one afternoon as she stubbornly lifted another plank. She straightened, breathless but smiling. "I'm not proving anything. I'm living." He said nothing more, but his eyes softened in quiet admiration. Weeks turned into months. The cabin took shape, sturdy walls, a wide porch, a great stone hearth. But Zeke didn't stop there. With the money her father had paid him for cruelty, he built beauty instead. He crafted wide windows that caught the morning light, carved beams that stretched like cathedral arches. Even a small library, lined with shelves, he'd shaped by hand. When Genevieve saw the final room, a sunlit space overlooking the stream, she turned to him in awe. "Zeke, this isn't a cabin, it's a palace." He smiled, faint and shy. "Then it's yours." "No," she said softly. "It's ours." From that day, They began to live, not just survive. Jenny planted flowers along the porch steps, wild daisies, lavender, mountain lilies. She painted the walls pale cream and hung linen curtains that fluttered in the wind. The once silent valley came alive with color and laughter. At night, they'd sit by the hearth. Zeke would carve small figurines from wood, a bear, a bird, once even a tiny horse that made her laugh. "You have an artist's hands," she told him. He chuckled. "I've got a worker's hands. You just see what's good in everything." "Because you've taught me to," she said. Sometimes, when he looked at her across the firelight, he'd forget to breathe. Gone was the frightened girl from San Francisco. In her place stood a woman radiant with purpose, her eyes alive, her laughter rich, her hands calloused from creation instead of restraint. One evening, as the sunset painted the valley gold, Genevieve stood on the porch, hair catching the breeze. "When you first brought me here, I thought I was being buried," she said. "But this place, it gave me back to myself." Zeke stepped beside her. "You did that on your own." She smiled, glancing up at him. "Maybe, but you built the walls that made me feel safe enough to try." He turned toward her, his voice low. "Your father wanted me to destroy you. I think instead, you're the one rebuilding me." For a long moment, they said nothing more. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of smoke and wildflowers. When the first snow returned the next winter, the house stood finished, tall and strong, the hearth glowing warm. They had built not just walls and beams, but trust and tenderness. One night, while the snow fell heavy outside, Zeke found her sitting by the fire, sketching on a piece of parchment. He crouched beside her. "What are you drawing?" "Our home," she said, smiling. "So I never forget what love can build from cruelty." He brushed his rough fingers against her hand, a touch light enough to tremble. "You think love built this?" She looked up, her gaze steady. "Don't you?" He paused, heart pounding in the quiet. "I didn't know that's what it was, until you said it." Outside the storm raged, but inside the world was calm. Two souls, once cast aside by the world, had built something the mountains themselves would remember. Spring returned to the valley with a rush of color, wildflowers crawling across the hills, the stream running high with meltwater. The house stood proud now, its wooden beams glowing honey gold in the sunlight. To anyone passing by, it might have looked like a small kingdom carved into the mountainside. To Genevieve, it was a kingdom, one built not on power or gold, but on decency and quiet strength. Yet peace rarely lasts long when born of defiance. One morning, as Jenny was hanging laundry by the porch, she saw a dust trail rising from the road below. A single rider approached, his horse foaming and tired. Zeke stepped out of the barn, instinctively resting his hand on the revolver at his hip. The messenger dismounted, breathless. "You Stormridge?" "I am," Zeke said. The man handed him a sealed envelope. "From San Francisco, Vandermeer family." Zeke's face hardened. He dismissed the rider and opened the letter. His jaw clenched as he read. "What is it?" Jenny asked, setting the basket down. "Your family," he said grimly. "They know you're alive." Her heart sank. "How?" He handed her the letter. In sharp, elegant handwriting, her father's words burned from the page. "You have made a fool of us long enough. Return home at once, or Mr. Stormridge will answer for his deceit. You are a Vandermeer. You belong among your own kind." Jenny's throat tightened. "They don't care about me. They care about what people think." Zeke nodded slowly. "And they're coming. That's what this means." For days a quiet tension settled over them. Zeke began keeping his rifle near the door again, his every movement edged with vigilance. Jenny watched him from across the cabin, the man who had saved her life, now bracing to protect it once more. "I don't want you hurt because of me," she said one night as he checked the shutters. He turned to her. "I've been hurt by worse men than your father." "That's not what I mean." Her voice trembled. "If they take me, promise you won't—" "Don't say it," he cut in, his tone rough. "They can't take what doesn't belong to them any more." A week later, the storm came, not of weather, but of wheels and hooves. 3 carriages wound up the valley trail, gold crests glinting on their doors. Reginald Vandermeer himself stepped out, flanked by armed escorts and a lawyer. "Miss Vandermeer," he called, voice dripping with contempt, "your childish rebellion ends today. You're coming home." Jenny stood on the porch, her chin high, though her hands trembled at her sides. "Home?" she said. "You paid a man to kill me." Her father's face tightened. "We paid him to remove you, for your own good. Imagine what people would say if they saw you living like a common woman." Zeke stepped forward. "Careful how you finish that sentence." Reginald sneered. "You think this little cabin and your rough manners make you a man? You're nothing but a hired hand who broke his word. I could have you imprisoned." Zeke reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded letter, the one Vandermeer had written him a year before, sealed with the family crest. "I kept the proof," he said. "Every word of your contract, every lie. If I'm guilty, so are you." The lawyer blanched, whispering urgently to Vandermeer, but the older man waved him off. "You wouldn't dare." Zeke's expression didn't change. "Try me." Silence stretched between them. Then Genevieve stepped down from the porch, her voice clear and steady. "You taught me that money buys obedience, but Zeke taught me something greater, that love builds freedom. I will never go back to you." Reginald's composure cracked, his face twisting in fury. "You're a fool," he spat. "You've thrown away your name, your inheritance." "I've kept my soul," she said simply. He turned toward Zeke, his voice cold. "You'll regret crossing me, mountain man." Zeke stepped closer until they were eye to eye. "I stopped regretting things the day I decided to save her." There was nothing left to say. Reginald Vandermeer turned sharply, signaling his men. Within moments, the carriages rolled back down the valley road, their wheels spitting mud in defeat. Jenny stood frozen, trembling, as the last trace of her old life disappeared. Then Zeke reached out, resting a hand on her shoulder. "It's over," he murmured. She shook her head. "No, Zeke, it's beginning, and this time I choose who I am." But the Vandermeer family was not done. Pride like theirs did not retreat quietly. 2 weeks after their departure, word came from the nearby town of Ash Hollow. Reginald Vandermeer had filed charges against Ezekiel Stormridge, accusing him of kidnapping and extortion. A warrant was signed, and a deputy was already on his way to the mountain. Zeke read the notice at the general store and felt the familiar heat of injustice rise in his chest. He knew this game. The rich twisted truth into a weapon, and men like him bled for it. He saddled his horse that night, intent on riding down to clear his name before they could come to the door. When he turned, Genevieve stood in the doorway, wrapped in her shawl. "You can't go alone. I'm not letting them drag you into their mess," he said. Her voice trembled, but her gaze was fierce. "It is my mess. You saved my life, Zeke. Now I save yours." The next morning they rode into town together. The townsfolk watched as they dismounted in front of the sheriff's office, the refined young woman with the mountain man who looked carved from thunder. Inside, the sheriff, a small man with an uncertain conscience, cleared his throat. "Mr. Stormridge, you understand there's an accusation." "Read the second letter," Genevieve interrupted. She placed an envelope on the desk, the Vandermeer family seal gleaming red. My father's own words, hiring him to dispose of me, signed and dated. The sheriff's eyes widened as he read. The room fell silent. Zeke folded his arms. "Still think I kidnapped her?" Outside, bootsteps echoed. Reginald Vandermeer had arrived, flanked by 2 private guards and his lawyer. His expression curdled when he saw Genevieve standing upright, radiant, alive. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You're coming home, girl." "No," she said, stepping in front of Zeke. "You'll not command me ever again." Vandermeer lunged forward, his temper snapping. "You ungrateful!" Zeke caught his wrist mid-air, his grip iron. "You raise that hand again, and I'll forget every law this town ever wrote." For a heartbeat, no one breathed. The sheriff, pale and sweating, slammed his gavel on the desk. "That's enough. The man's innocent, and this case is closed." Vandermeer jerked his arm free, humiliated. "You'll regret crossing my name." Zeke leaned closer, his voice like rolling thunder. "You already regret crossing hers." Reginald's eyes burned with hatred as he turned and strode out. The guards followed. Outside, the sunlight broke through the clouds, flooding the street with warmth. Genevieve exhaled shakily. "He won't stop hating me." Zeke holstered his revolver. "Then let him hate. He can't reach this high." She looked up at him, the man who had faced down her father's power with nothing but truth and grit. "You didn't just save me," she whispered. "You gave me back my voice." He smiled faintly. "Then use it. Tell the world who you are." And she did, not with shouting, but with the quiet dignity of a woman who had finally stopped apologizing for existing. The spring sun dipped low behind the mountains as Zeke and Genevieve rode home through the quiet valley. The snowmelt shimmered like silver ribbons along the fields, and the house, their house, stood waiting, its windows glowing gold in the dusk. Neither spoke for a long time. The wind carried the scent of pine and earth, and somewhere far off a hawk cried. When they finally reached the porch, Genevieve turned to look at him. "You could have walked away that first night," she said softly. "Taken the money, left me in the dark." Zeke's voice was low, steady. "I almost did. Until you asked me if I was going to kill you. No one should ever have to ask that question." She smiled faintly, eyes bright with tears. "You didn't just spare me, Zeke. You gave me a life, a home, a reason." He shook his head. "You gave me one. I spent half my years building walls around myself, and then you showed up. Too brave to be broken, too kind to be forgotten." The evening light spilled across the porch, catching the scar that ran along his jaw. Jenny reached out, tracing it with gentle fingers. "You built me a palace, Zeke, not of marble or gold, but of wood, sweat, and heart, the kind that never falls." He took her hand, rough fingers closing around hers. "Then let's keep building." She nodded, smiling through the tears. Together they stepped into the house, the fire already crackling, the scent of bread and cedar filling the air. Outside, the stars began to appear over the Oregon hills, each one a witness to the impossible truth, that love could grow even from betrayal, and that mercy could build kingdoms where cruelty once ruled. Stories like Genevieve and Zeke's remind us that Even the cruelest betrayals can become the soil where love takes root. Sometimes the people who were meant to destroy us end up giving us the chance to rebuild, stronger, freer, and finally seen for who we are. If you're still listening, tell me, where in the world are you hearing this story from? I'd love to know. And if you still believe that kindness can rewrite the stories cruelty begins, don't scroll away. The next tale of hope and redemption waits just beyond the mountains.